This week on the THEOS Cybernova podcast.
I had not put myself in the situation of being under such an immense nation-state attack. I ended up with a very crowded war room handling the response with 3 IR firms who initially did not want to talk to each other. I would say we did about 1 year's worth of work in the space of 6 weeks. You must fine-tune your communication, your presentation skills, and your personal branding and gravitas that you can go in front of a board or push back on a CEO and get what you need to protect the organisation. It's one thing having credit card information stolen or ATMs hijacked, but if medical equipment stops functioning, if medical record platforms are encrypted, then it's a whole nother ballgame.
The THEOS Cybernova podcast, hosted by Paul Jackson.
Welcome to another episode of THEOS Cybernova podcast. Today I'm joined by the incredible James McLeary, who's joined us all the way from Thailand. And in fact, we're meeting here in Kuala Lumpur, together in person. James, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Paul. It's a real honour to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, we've known each other quite some time now, a number of years. We obviously work together, and so I'm really excited about this episode because you are one of the sharpest people I've ever met in this field. I know it's going to be a really interesting session today, so we'll leap right into it. And, well, I want to learn more about, your story that you told in the recent book written by David G., which obviously had a number of CISOs contributing to it, and we'll talk more about his book in a moment. But your first experience when you were with the bank in Thailand was quite an exciting one, wasn't it? You were a few days in, am I right? And suddenly you get hit with Lazarus.
To that particular role, yeah, I mean, just an absolute shock, terrifying. I knew who Lazarus was because I had read up on the Bangladesh heist and, all the case studies relating to that. I had heard about the Sony attack, but to actually see it in front of me, see that encrypted email that said Lazarus were instigating an attack against me, took it to a whole new level. And yeah, it's a little bit, you have a plan until you get punched in the face by Mike Tyson, right? That's exactly how I felt at that moment in time. And, my mind just went to, is it true? We better start looking, scanning to see if it really is true. Escalation and response. But yeah, it's a day I'll never forget.
Wow. I mean, it was also a Friday, right? When we often joke about this, being the Friday fire drill, and it couldn't have come at a worse time, really. The weekend kicking in and, what were the first steps you took? I mean, what was your initial actions?
Yeah, the first step was to cancel my travel plans for the weekend. But beyond that, I said to my team, conduct some scans immediately to see, is it true that we're having data egress from the network as was stated in the threat intelligence email that was passed to us. Second was immediate escalation because, I knew how serious this was going to be. I had, before that occurred, I had not put myself in the situation of being under such an immense nation-state attack. And I knew that the organisation had not had that experience either. So it was important to move quickly, get that escalation going, and then start the response activities immediately. And quite fortuitously, I had met that very same week, with a incident response company, and immediately contacted them, and they started working on the weekend straight away.
I'm curious because, in the book, it says that you actually have 3 DFIR companies in them. Talk me through that, because, that's quite unusual to have 3 working on. Why did you have 3 different companies?
Yeah, it was unusual. It was a little, the first one was, as I mentioned, I had just met with them, so they were front and foremost on my mind. And it was an Israeli group. They responded very quickly, very effectively. The second one was part of an organisational relationship with Mandiant. So it wasn't specifically a retainer that I was holding, but there was a relationship that resulted in us bringing them in. And then thirdly was, as I mentioned in the book, Microsoft, because, they were helping us on a lot of the response activities. I knew many people there. So yeah, I ended up with a very crowded war room handling the response with 3 IR firms who initially did not want to talk to each other.
I was going to say, that's you've got competitors in there, right? And that must have been a bit weird.
Yeah, it was weird. And I remember at one point standing up on the table in the war room and demanding that all 3 of them work together. And then things changed a bit after that.
I mean, and it's super interesting, they're going through this experience, because I think, we talk a lot about cyber resilience and being ready for these incidents, but are we ever really ready? I mean, you must have had a lot of learning points from there, because clearly you didn't have this signed in advance. Was the contracting, did that take you time? And did that delay things, for example?
Somewhat. What became an issue immediately was we needed to fast track procurement, which often in ASEAN countries is a challenge in itself. But I was able to get across the gravitas of the situation, which meant that the crisis management team was empowered to push things through from a procurement point of view. Secondly, and this took a little bit longer, but I got them to agree on an emergency budget, which then became a lesson learned afterwards that, we should, CISOs should have access to an emergency budget in the time of crisis where they can, quickly procure any additional equipment or vendors and not have to have, a long approval process and as part of that, yeah.
That's a really good point. I never really thought about that, but having a slush fund or an emergency fund, it could be absolutely critical. The other point I'd like to touch on is perhaps culture, because you had an Israeli company and 2 American companies working with Thai staff. And, well, we've both lived in this region for a lot of years, and we know there is a lot of differences in cultures. How did you handle that?
That was really tough, I have to say, especially as, I was a CISO. My counterpart, the CIO, had to do a lot of the heavy lifting. During a cyber attack, you are changing network configurations, you are installing software, installing equipment, and that comes down on the IT teams as a whole, and not only the security teams. So there was a bit of a shock and awe. A mentality, and especially as all of the IR firms were ex-military experienced, so they approached it very much like a military exercise, and it was, get this done by this time and report back, and and don't have excuses. Looking back, I would say we did about 1 year's worth of work in the space of 6 weeks. Just getting everything done.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, and for anybody who wants to, really dive into this, you've written a brilliant chapter in David G's book. We do strongly recommend that anybody who is interested should buy this book. Right? It's a great read, because you're not the only expert in it. David's put together a slew of real experts globally.
Yeah, it's an incredible lineup. All CISOs pretty much, but with diverse backgrounds, and each giving their expertise in different areas of cybersecurity. So it really is a bit of a CISO manual, I would say, and well done to David for pulling together such a cast.
Indeed, yeah. The book is called A Day in the Life of a CISO, Personal Mentorship from 24 plus Battle-Tested CISOs, The Mentoring We Never Got. Great title. And we'll put a link to it in the podcast releases so that, you know where to buy it. But it is a great read, certainly, and highly recommended. So moving on a little bit, this talk about resilience, right? Retainers. First of all, retainers are priceless, aren't they? I mean, you don't want to be dealing with limits of liability and indemnity clauses during a crisis. So retainers are a must. But how do you find the right DFIR partner? You had experience with 3 just in one incident alone. You've obviously worked together with me and another provider, Kroll, where we'll talk about that in a bit, where we obviously did DFIR. How does a CISO who doesn't really know much about DFIR, how do they go about knowing which is the right company to choose?
So one thing as part of my incident experience that is in the book that resonated very strongly with me was one of the incident responders played more of a breach coach role. And he, gave me a shoulder to cry on almost. He kind of explained, this is what is likely to happen next. These are some of the messages that you may want to share with the regulator, share with other external stakeholders, and just kind of put me at ease, given that, this was my first time going through such a major crisis event. So I took that experience and what that particular coach did within the incident response and brought that into consulting. And, I think, Paul, when we were at Kroll, we realized that we had to not just have the forensic response, but also managing the C-level of the client that's been breached, explaining very clearly to them in non-technical terms about what's going to happen, what they should do. And so I think finding a retainer partner that can offer you that business level coaching as well as the technical forensic response is paramount.
Yeah, and I think, that's something I've obviously carried into my new role at THEOS, because there were a lot of lessons learned at Kroll. We had a brilliant team there, obviously, and, carrying those lessons in terms of, having the technical brilliance of the analysts, but with the communication skills, the hand-holding, if you like, of our clients, and understanding the impact from a business point of view is absolutely critical. You cannot just rely on the tech alone. And one of the good things we had going at Kroll was obviously the fact that someone with your background, having gone through a major crisis like this, would also participate in the DFIR investigations that we had and bring your experience in terms of guiding the CISO, in terms of, next steps beyond just the breach. Because as you explain in the book, there's more to a breach. There's the recovery part afterwards, and helping companies and guiding them on that path is also critical. So, all too often, I think companies look for responder or retainer firms that may have some sort of incident response background, but they really need to look at the full package that the company brings to the table. And as I said, this is what I've tried to do with THEOS. We're, as you know, James, from our conversations, we're an Asia-focused company that's aiming to make a mark in terms of doing things right in this region. And we do hope that that's what our clients want and need. So it's good to hear you say that.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the Asia experience is obviously very crucial as well, right? Because dealing with an incident in Asia is different from Australia or from Europe, so having the cultural experience and navigating that into the response is paramount if you're going to be successful.
Indeed, and that's again why we enjoyed having you on board at Kroll, because you've lived in the region a long time and you understand the nuances, and I think that's vital to somebody like yourself who's operating in this region, and I think same goes for all of us. But it's just a shame that Kroll decided to withdraw from the cyber operations in the Asia Pacific region, but it's provided other opportunities for others to fill that gap. So all good. Now let's talk about your journey a little bit, because you've lived in Thailand now for a long time, and why? I mean, you're obviously from Bonnie, Scotland, and what was your journey briefly, in getting there?
I was a software engineer. I became a product of the GE IT Management Leadership Program. Moved into as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt doing business transformation ended up in risk management, which brought me back over to Asia and Hong Kong. And from there, moved into cybersecurity. And I remember seeing one of those mind maps back in, what was it, be 2015 or slightly earlier when cyber was really just coming out. And I looked at that mind map and I thought, oh my goodness, how can any one person do such a role? Because you need technical ability, risk management, change management, communication, procurement and managing vendors and budget management. And, there were so many different angles off that mind map of what constitutes a successful CISO. But I realized that, I had experience in many or actually most of those areas. And that's where I decided that the CISO role was one that I wanted to pursue. So I had the opportunity in Thailand. My wife is Thai, also a New Zealand citizen, and we had some property in Thailand. So we moved over, I guess it must be about 17 years ago now.
Wow, that's a long time to be living out in this part of the world. And, it's pretty important, as you say, for understanding the culture and being able to operate effectively in this region. But you've also done in-house and as a consultant, obviously, when you were together with me at Kroll. Pros and cons. What's the, you've got experience from both sides of the table, and any other CISO perhaps considering a move to the dark side, to consulting, what advice would you give?
So pros and cons, for the in-house role, you're dealing with day-to-day problems that you cannot walk away from, after the engagement is finished. You own it, and, that means that you're there for the long haul. So it does drag you down into a lot of areas which, minutia, dealing with very task level matters, maybe getting involved in intercompany politics. Those are some of the cons in an in-house role. For some of the pros, I would say is, you really get to build the culture and build the team, the organization around you. So you leave a legacy behind you, and hopefully it's a good one where you've been able to deliver a lot of value to your end customer. On the consulting side, for me, I got a real buzz out of helping customers and helping such a variety of customers across different sectors and different engagement types, and being able to see the different levels of maturity. So maybe you gained a best practice experience from one customer that you're then able to bring into another customer that's not at that level. And so that's very satisfying to see the valor of your trade bringing customers up in terms of a level of maturity. I guess the downside or the cons on the consulting side, it's, the market has been turbulent, and, job longevity can certainly come into mind, and that's not for everyone, right? We might even see some of that now with AI, where some consultancies are laying off roles due to AI and the impact that they expect that may have. But it's I would say it's not going to be for everyone. If you are currently in an in-house role and you are considering consulting, I would say, what is it that you're passionate about? Are you passionate about that customer success? Do you enjoy sales and enjoy those regular meetings with customers across different industries?
Yeah, and obviously I watched you, whilst you were working together with me at Kroll, and I think one of the things that energized you wasn't just focused on the advisory piece, on the vCISO type work, but rather also getting involved in incidents, as we've just talked about. You used to thrive on those, I remember, and the opportunity, I think, in consulting is much broader, isn't it, to get involved in those kind of exciting types of cases. So yeah, it's pros and cons, and it's not for everybody though, because there is the selling component. You have to be a good communicator. You have to be able to articulate your value. And I think that's something that anybody who's considering perhaps going into consulting from an in-house role should be very cognizant of. You need to have that sort of confidence to go into to sell. Let's step back a little further below that. How do junior people, or junior professionals, I should say, get to be a CISO? What sort of career paths should they be looking at? If, any youngsters listening to this today thinking one day I want to be that CISO, what advice would you give them in terms of a career path?
So in the different cybersecurity teams that I've managed, there tends to be two types of people. One are the more risk management mentality. They will manage projects, they will look at the vulnerabilities, formulate strategy, do the risk assessments. And then the other people are those that are more technically orientated. They get a buzz out of doing the red team work, doing the pen testing and so on. But to be a CISO, I think you need to understand both sides of the house very strongly. So one of the things that I did before I became a CISO was, and I came from the risk management side of the shop. But I signed up on bug bounty programs. I did capture the flag initiatives, and I got into the more technical aspect, having been a software engineer in my previous roles. So having that balance of the technical understanding, but also the strategy, risk management, risk assessment side is very important. But then you have to overlay that, and it's, as a CISO, you're presenting yourself to the board, you're meeting regularly with your fellow C-level, so you really need to be a change advocate. You need to be able to communicate very technical matters in a way that will resonate and get you buy-in to solve problems and get budget. So you must fine-tune your communication, your presentation skills, and your personal branding and gravitas, that you can go in front of a board or push back on a CEO and get what you need to protect the organization.
Yeah, that meshes. I get asked this all the time, the same kind of question. And every time I'll answer communication. It's absolutely vital. It doesn't matter how technical you are, how gifted you are. If you can't articulate and explain what you're doing in a business context, then unfortunately in-house as a CISO, you will really struggle. And I think, even doing things like Toastmaster courses, learning how to do public speaking really enhances the value of a future CISO. So, yeah, I can only say that put yourself in those difficult positions. Go and volunteer to speak at conferences where you can. It may be out of your comfort zone, but the more you do it, the more you learn, right?
Absolutely. And, you might find that you really enjoy it.
100%. So, and that's actually leads into the next question, which is, where should a CISO report to? Because obviously you've got to communicate to somebody who in the ideal world, who do you think the CISO should be reporting to?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it should be the CEO. Right. Companies, I don't know why companies are still wrestling with this one today. It has to be the CEO, and because the CISO needs to be on an equal standing as the CIO. Right. If not, security will always play second fiddle to IT investments. So, you need to be there amongst the other C-level. And this one concerns me particularly in Asia, because we are seeing, the CISO role has not yet gravitated in every country to the level it needs to be. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of chief AI officers or chief ethical integrity officers. There's other C-level roles which are being pushed out now. And quite frankly, I think the CISO, if they were at the right level in the organization, should be taking ownership of a lot of those requirements and representing the C-level committee in those subject matters.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. It should be a boardroom discussion. It should be, a conversation with the CEO and the board. And I 100% agree with your approach there. This is switching gears slightly, but when you were working with me, obviously we got involved in quite a few crisis exercises. But can you, from your position now as a CISO, can you articulate the importance of these and the value and how you would conduct them in your own organization?
Yeah, so I'm actually about to do one in my own organization, and the reason I'm doing it myself this time around is not because I think I'm great at them, but rather it's for a lot of the people involved, it's the first time that they will have experienced it. So there's a little bit of a uncomfort zone that I'm going to have to break down. So I thought, okay, for the first instance, we'll run it internally. It won't be as polished as an external firm can do, but it will allow me just to set a level of expectation and comfort. But then absolutely, for the second exercise, I would bring in a third-party company like THEOS to help us run such a cyber exercise and really give it that external realism and threat intelligence overlay. But, to me, tabletop exercises are absolutely crucial. It's, the analogy of a pilot, every time they know how to fly the 747, but every time they go out, they still go through their flip chart and check everything is in place as it should be. And so that's really what we're doing by running regular cyber tabletop exercises. It's making sure that your checklist is known to everyone, that people practice, and those lesson learns hopefully start to come down the more that you do them, the more that you drill it.
Right, muscle memory kind of thing. And that's, but I think you're right, because all too often I've seen companies go, yeah, come on in THEOS, do an exercise for us without having done one before. And it turns into a bit of a disaster. And, because they're just not ready for it. And I think you're doing it the right way. You start off gently, do it in-house, and build up to some of the more advanced ones. But the sooner you can get to the advanced ones, the sooner you're more at a level where you feel comfortable to deal with incidents. Because the initial ones, I think, that you're doing will help you to check whether your playbooks are working, whether people have actually read them for starters and actually know their roles and responsibilities in a fairly simple scenario, I would guess, a ransomware type scenario or something. But ultimately, I think the real meaningful ones are when you get a kind of red team or pen test approach where they come in and look at the actual technology that you're using and develop a realistic scenario based on the what's in place, and input it in the injects rather than at the senior level. Input the injects at the working level, because in reality, it'll be the working guys, the cyber guys, who have to try and explain to the bosses. We won't be there in a crisis explaining things. So the sooner your team gets used to talking to the bosses about the potential impact of a crisis, the better prepared they will be, I guess. So those are the kind of evolution, I think, of crisis exercises. But I'm glad you said they are a must, because, yeah, definitely. It's, you don't want to be going through your playbooks in a real incident for the first time.
Absolutely not, no.
Right. So one last question before we go into a couple of cheeky questions that I've got for you at the end. But you've been in CISO in the financial world, and obviously you then went into consulting, and now you're in the hospital healthcare world. I'm curious, what differences have you seen between the financial world and the hospital?
So in financial services, obviously, the regulatory environment is very strong, even across Asia. There's a very strong demand on cyber within the financial regulators. And that drives change, and it drives budget. So, in financial services, budgets tend to be a little bit more healthy for cybersecurity. And if you look across the industries, financial services will be the most mature in terms of their capabilities within cyber. Healthcare, on the other hand, although there are regulations globally, the likes of HIPAA in the US, they're playing catch up with financial services, and In Asia, we've still got a ways to go. Many countries have been introducing, of course, critical infrastructure laws. Hong Kong did it recently. A lot of the ASEAN countries have their cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, and healthcare is part of that. But it's not yet at that same level of demand, I would say, in comparison with the financial regulators. So unfortunately, that does reflect somewhat on budgets and maturity within healthcare. That said, the pressure within the hospital environment, can be even worse than in financial services. But it's not so much about the regulator coming down upon you, but you are protecting people's lives. Right. And, it's one thing having credit card information stolen or ATMs hijacked, but if medical equipment stops functioning, if medical record platforms are encrypted, then it's a whole nother ballgame. So the severity level is very extreme. And we've seen that, I think it was last year, one of the largest cyber attacks ever in the US was in a healthcare hospital environment. And because they had encrypted much of the infrastructure, the hospital could not process insurance claims, which meant they had to turn away patients. And, so it had a massive impact, not only on the ransom that was paid, but also the regulatory fines, and then the overall reputation of the hospital in addition.
Yeah, I can only imagine that being stressful as well. And Thailand also prides itself on being a centre for medical tourism. The hospitals there are first rate, right? They're some of the best in the world. And any damage to that reputation would, obviously the government would be not happy. But the other side, I mean, I've at THEOS, obviously, we do a lot of pen testing and red team, and we're getting an increasing amount of requests for AI, testing of AI bots, etc. But also, of course, IoT devices. And that must be very different in your world, because you must have a completely diverse set of devices that you need to protect. I mean, because almost everything is networked nowadays, right?
Yeah. It's and similar with manufacturing. It used to be equipment on the manufacturing floor or on the patients, like the scanning machines, the radiologist x-rays and so on. They would all be standalone, but that's no longer the case. Much of that equipment is using AI to analyze results, to share information with doctors. So it's interconnected, not just with the IT network, but very often with AI platforms, LLM models. So the attack surface has grown massively. I need to protect my IT environment. I need to protect my medical device environment, the IoT environment, the cloud environment, and now the AI modules, which are being increasingly used. Even we used to have shadow IT, now we have shadow AI, and so as CIO and CISO, I have regular arguments with myself about what's the best way to control these risks and at the same time allow the hospital to move forward and in transformation.
Right, yes, the age-old battle between, allowing the use of technology, which helps, and makes things more efficient versus making sure it's secure. I tell you what, our ethical hackers at THEOS, they love these challenges, though. All these new devices and new technologies, it makes life more interesting for them, and they love trying to hack these devices. Right, we've run out of time, but before we close up today, I'd just like to thank everyone for listening, and please do hit that like and subscribe buttons. It helps us to get out to a broader audience with all this important information. But I've got a couple of questions for you, James. You're my second Scottish guest, and I did ask my previous Scottish guest, can you say the phrase purple burglar alarm?
No, I cannot, but I will try. I can say 11. I
was going to ask you as well, is your office on the 11th floor? I'm sure those who've seen the memes will understand where we're going.
Purple burglar alarm.
Very good. There you go. All right, my final question is, as always, I'm a music lover, right? And it's my way of decompressing with from stress of work sometimes is by putting on a good old-fashioned vinyl record. What's on your playlist at the moment, James?
Paul, I've watched you ask this question to other guests, and this was the one that put the fear of God in me. So, but funnily enough, this morning my Spotify just had the 2025 reviews. So up on my list was some good old Scottish bands. Texas was number one. Franz Ferdinand was number two. And then number 3 and 4 were some obscure Spanish and French bands, Nouvelle, I can't even remember the name, but very chilled out music that I often just put in the background, and so that's been my playlist.
Fantastic. All right, James, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's really a real pleasure having you.
Thank you, Paul. It was really enjoyed it, and congratulations on the podcast.
Oh, and by the way, one last question: Did the THEOS Cybernova podcast appear on your end of year list?
Believe it or not, it was number 4 on my top podcast list, just behind Joe Rogan.
Wow, there we go, just behind Joe. I'll take that. Thanks very much for being with us today, James.
Thank you.
THEOS Cybernova was presented by myself, Paul Jackson. The studio engineer and editor was Roy DeMonte. The executive producer was myself and Ian Carlos. And this podcast is a co-production between THEOS Cyber and W4 Podcast Studio in Dubai.
The THEOS Cybernova podcast,